welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I am your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week we go over the big UFC 320 card, which is headlined by two title fights. In the main event, we got Magomedov Ankalaev looking to put an end to his rivalry against Alex Pereira and looking to defend that title after winning it off Pereira earlier this year. In the co-main event, we got Dvalishvili looking to defend his bantamweight title for the third time this year as he takes on Sandhagen, who has clearly done enough to get the love of the UFC brass and earn himself a title shot. There are some other fun fights sprinkled out throughout this card. Notables, obviously, Patchy Mix looking to get some redemption as well. We got Abus Magomedov taking on Joe Pyfer, which is a great matchup. Yusuf Zalal looking to continue his winning streak after an abysmal performance last time around. And I can't recall the third fight there on the main card. Let me just quickly pull that up here. Oh yeah, how could I forget? Light heavyweight scrap here between Yuri Prochazka and Khalil Rountree should be a fun offering there at 205 pounds. Let's quickly go over the lock of the night play and dog of the night play for last week. We come through with the lock of the night play as Alexia Thaynar does the damn thing against Loma Lukbami, and you should be too strong and too physical, and her grappling would be too good. Hence why I was more than confident with taking that chalk on her to cash that ticket for us. That now brings our lock of the night record on the year to 47-31 for a 60% hit rate. Again, not where I want the hit rate to be. Still, just staying the course and trying to get closer by the ending of the year. And then the dog of the night did not come through for us with Colby Thickness and Josiah Musasa going over 2.5 rounds. I thought there'd be some violence, but the slickness of Thickness allowed him to stay away from too much trouble there from Musasa and actually end up picking the upset victory as well. So that drops our dog of the night record now to 46-53 on the year for a 46% hit rate, but we're still pretty well in the profit there for the dog of the night play, so I'm very happy about that. It is a busy week, though. We got a handful of events here. Obviously, Contender Series just wrapped up today. PFL goes down on Friday afternoon. We have OKTAGON and Cage Warriors going down Saturday afternoon, all leading up to UFC 320. I will have breakdowns for the PFL out hopefully by Wednesday evening, if not by Thursday afternoon, and I'll also have Cage Warriors breakdowns for you guys on Friday, so stay tuned for all that good stuff. And the OKTAGON breakdowns will only be in written form on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, so make sure you guys check the link in the description below to get access to that. All right, just a reminder there, the reason this has been pushed back to Tuesday is because I was supposed to drop the Contender Series breakdowns on Sunday. Odds did not come out till Sunday night, so I gave them about an evening to settle out. I dropped it on Monday, and just to not clash with the Contender Series video, I waited to drop this UFC 320 breakdown on Tuesday night. So appreciate your patience, appreciate the love, appreciate the support. If you're on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, you already got the written breakdowns for this, so you already know where my head's at. And again, another reason to jump on that over there. Last note here before we get into the breakdowns, Atiba Gauthier was supposed to fight Ozzy Diaz. Diaz pulled out, and I believe they will be announcing a replacement for Diaz very shortly here, but we won't have odds in time for me to record this full card breakdown, so I will be dropping a separate breakdown video for that probably by Thursday, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Again, whatever poor soul is signing up to fight Atiba Gauthier, I hope the money is worth it. Because more than likely he's going to run over whoever they bring in on short notice, but I'll still break it down for you guys in its own video. All right, let's get right into this 13 fight card to talk about on this podcast. First matchup up is in the women's flyweight division, as we have Veronica Hardy coming in at minus 650 going up against Brogan Walker, who comes in at plus 475. Now Hardy is coming off of a loss and having her 3-fight winning streak snap last time around, as Eduardo Mora did a good job in terms of utilizing her physicality and strength and power to really just snatch that fight away from Hardy. Hardy has normally shown a little bit more of a mobile striking game powered by her Taekwondo background. And after that 3-year layoff that she had that 3-fight winning streak afterwards, and a lot of that could be attributed to her husband / coach Dan Hardy, who we know is an analytical nut when it comes to mixed martial arts, and he was able to dig into the Taekwondo background of Hardy and help her exaggerate that advantage she normally has in her fights. But Mora was able to find ways to really cut her off, had some good grappling success in the second round, and that really caused Hardy some issues. Hardy needs to tighten up the defensive grappling ever so slightly, but also the gas tank management, because we often see her slowing down in third rounds. She did have a decent third round against Mora, but even Mora has a bit of a gas tank issue at times as well. Now Hardy takes on Brogan Walker, who's coming off of a 2.5-year-long layoff. Last time we saw her in the cage, she came up short against Yasmin Lucindo in Lucindo's second walk to the octagon. Walker was unable to get off on much of her success there, and she normally leans on a long-range striking game to touch up opponents from distance and really have some success from there, but we don't see her tap into her BJJ black belt all that often. She might be looking to implement that here, as she might see an opening for that, but given the layoff, given her getting up there in age, she just hasn't been that active as of late. She doesn't really even look that good of a fighter, if we're being honest. A lot of her wins coming against subpar talent, and when she faces anybody with any bit of legitimate resistance, like heck, she even has a loss to Pearl Gonzalez from back in the day. That's where she ends up coming up short, and that's why I think Hardy is the favorite here. And as big of a favorite as she is, tough to trust her at this number with that sketchy gas tank and possible defensive grappling issues, but I don't think Walker has a good enough wrestling game to really take advantage of that here with Hardy. So look for Hardy to just pick apart Walker from distance and eventually win this fight on the scorecards. Next up in the welterweight division, we got Ramiz Brahimaj coming in at plus 250, going up against Austin Vanderford, who comes in at minus 300. Now, Brahimaj pulled off a big upset last time around when he submitted Billy Ray Goff in the first round, further adding to his finishing record of 12 wins, 12 finishes, 11 of them coming in the first round. And that just goes to show that if he does get extended, he starts to find himself in some trouble. He is 1-5 in fights that enter round 2, with that one win obviously coming in round 2 as well. He's a very aggressive BJJ specialist, always searching for the neck of his opponents, and that's exactly what he did against Billy Ray Goff, who I thought had a horrible game plan. I get Goff's style is really putting pressure and activity on his opponents, but he kept going for a takedown and leaving his neck out to be snatched. And he got out of a few early guillotine attempts from Brahimaj, but the last one we saw Brahimaj get that high elbow guillotine and forced, actually didn't even force the tap. It put Goff clean out. So, there's a lot of question marks in terms of what Goff was thinking going into that fight. Now Brahimaj is on the cusp of a 3-fight winning streak, something that I'm sure that he's been trying to get ever since coming into the UFC, but he's been relatively inactive throughout his career, now picking up more activity and taking up a solid step up in competition here against Austin Vanderford, who finally got his crack in the UFC back in February when he came in on short notice against Nikolai Veretennikov. Now, I don't know if it was Paige Van Zandt whispering in Dana White's ear, but not often do we see the UFC sign guys that are 35 years old, but Vanderford was primed and ready to go, and I believe fighting close to home, or at least originally where they were from. That's why he ended up getting signed there. At 170 pounds, Vanderford is undefeated. His only 2 losses came up at 185 pounds when he was fighting for Bellator, where he got a title shot against Gegard Mousasi and then ended up losing his next fight as well against Aaron Jeffrey. But in recent years, he's been going down to 170 pounds, picked up 2 big wins. Well, that big win for LFA, got signed to the UFC, and really smothered Veretennikov with his classic wrestling approach, and he was able to eventually muster up a TKO finish at the ending of round 2. Vanderford has some decent hands, but it's really his wrestling, his pressure, and his BJJ that causes a lot of opponents issues, because he's so good with his control, and he's so good with mat returns as well in case his opponents do eventually work back to their feet. He has a great gas tank to go 15 minutes if he needs to, has some quality wins and quality competition on his record already, even has a win over the PFL middleweight tournament champion from this year, Fabian Edwards. I believe it was middleweight, but he did defeat him by decision a couple years back now. This is a a great fight for Vanderford, in my opinion. I think his submission defense is on point, that he should be able to deal with that chaotic style of Brahimaj early, and I really think he'll start to wear Brahimaj down from that top position, shutting down the submission game. He could also use his power striking approach to really nullify Brahimaj and utilize his wrestling defensively, but I think we'll eventually see him get to that wrestling, especially in the second and third rounds, and I think that's where we'll see Vanderford eventually muster up a finish here. So I don't mind this chalk on him. I think he comes through, and I think he comes through relatively easily. All right, next up, sticking with the welterweights, we're going to go with Punahele Soriano coming in at minus 280, going up against Ankalaev Veretennikov, who comes in at plus 240. Now, Soriano is now 2-0 at 170 pounds, and it seems like the new lifestyle that he's had to take on is starting to pay off for him. Let's see how far he can take it at welterweight, especially with him being 32 years old. His first stint at the 170-pound weight class was against Miguel Baeza, and that night he utilized his wrestling, which we know he has in his back pocket, and didn't really work out all that well for him at 185 pounds. But knowing how the strength and size advantage he'll have in a lot of these fights at 170, he utilized it perfectly against Baeza, muzzling him the entire 15 minutes and winning that fight on the scorecards. Then, when everybody thought he was going to go out there and wrestle Medic, he uncorked his big power that we've known to come from him, and he was able to knock out Uroš Medic, I believe, in 30 seconds or 31 seconds it was. So he has both styles, right? He can put that big power on his opponents and really put them away that way. He's very explosive, very fast, very powerful early. But he also has that wrestling, which he can lean on if he has a good enough advantage over the opponent that he's going up against on the weekend. Now, he's going up against Ankalaev Veretennikov, who I was able to cash as an underdog last time around against Francisco Prado in a very close fight. I honestly thought that once the scorecards were being read, that Veretennikov was going to lose. I thought Prado had done enough in the second and third rounds to get the win there, but luckily for me and luckily for the bet, we had Veretennikov winning the first two rounds on two judges' scorecards. The first round he won after slamming his way out of an armbar from Prado and then getting off some good damage on the feet. And then in the second and third rounds, he was really struggling with the wrestling of Prado. He did manage to get off some decent damage in that second round, but I thought Prado still did enough to win that round. Veretennikov, 35 years old, kind of well-rounded. He isn't really thriving at one aspect of mixed martial arts. He's a good striking game, decent grappling game. His gas tank is a little bit of an issue, but we see when he fights strong enough grapplers, like when he fought Austin Vanderford, he really struggles to get up off of his back or have much success of his own. He has good experience through his 19 professional MMA fights and even through his 3 UFC fights thus far, but I think we've seen a ceiling, and I think that Soriano is a guy that he's not going to be able to get past. Whether it's Soriano utilizing his power punches to catch that chin of Veretennikov, which is quite hittable if we're being honest, I think Soriano will actually lean on his wrestling. If he can't get that knockout within the first minute to 2 minutes, that's where we'll see Soriano start to dig into his wrestling and really wearing Veretennikov down that way. So I like Soriano here. I don't mind the chalk on him either. I think he really stalls on Veretennikov and ends up winning this fight on the scorecards. I think that method of victory is very low-level confidence, though. Next up in the bantamweight division, we got Patchy Mix coming in at minus 250, going up against Jakub Wiklacz, who comes in at plus 210. Now, Mix had a very unfortunate UFC debut earlier this year where he came up short by decision at the hands of Mario Bautista. There was a lot of hype on Mix coming into the UFC, especially considering he had a 20-1 record and was the reigning Bellator or PFL champion coming into the promotion. But with only one takedown attempt, you have to really credit Bautista's game plan that night by scaring Mix off of the takedown attempts and really butchering him on the feet. Maybe butchering is a stretch. He picked him apart for the most part and really outpointed him there. There's a lot of strikes. I believe there was a total of 300 strikes combined that both these guys landed, but obviously Bautista edging him out there by about 40 or 50 strikes, I believe it was. But Mix was really struggling with the game planning of Bautista and the striking there. And obviously, you get the fans and the public that switch on Mix immediately after hyping him up going into that Bautista fight. And that's why I think that we're getting as the line that we're getting here this weekend against a UFC newcomer. But just quickly wrapping up on Mix here. really good BJJ, one of the nastiest BJJ specialists that we have in the bantamweight division. His wrestling could obviously continue to improve, but it's at a decent enough level. His striking is where he struggles a little bit, but depending on the level of competition, he usually does a good job in terms of mixing his striking behind his or in front of his grappling so that he can eventually get to a submission game, which is where he is so dangerous. Now he's going up against Jakub Wiklacz, who comes in as the KSW bantamweight champion. He defended the title 3 times before signing with the UFC earlier this year. Similar to, I believe it's a training partner of his, Robert Ruchala, who made his UFC debut early September and ended up coming up short against William Gomez. I believe it's actually Joanna Jędrzejczyk that we have to thank in terms of bringing these Polish prospects over to the UFC, as she is now, I believe, a manager for a lot of these Polish prospects. And Wiklacz, very entertaining, very solid fighter. Just like Patchy Mix, he's very crafty on the mat, very good submissions, good reversals, scrambles, sweeps. His wrestling could use a little bit of work as well. In the striking realm, he likes to switch stances a lot. He likes to utilize kicks. He likes to take command of the cage by walking his opponents down and landing his unorthodox shots. But I think he does his best work when he gets fights to the ground, just as we saw when he was able to actually jump on to a guillotine against his last opponent. Now, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the last opponent that he fought, but he fought that guy 5 times. And now the final record with that guy is now 4-1-1. Wiklacz is actually 12-1-1 since mid-2017, so he's really turned a corner in his career. But again, I think he's going to struggle here against Mix. Just as we saw with Ruchala early in September, KSW is a great promotion and all, but there is levels to this, and I think that Wiklacz will realize that as he takes on Mix, who I think is just a better grappling specialist. I think Mix will do a good job in terms of controlling these positions. I think Wiklacz will make a little bit of this competitive early with some of his reversals and some of his scrambles, but I think Mix will be able to stay ahead of him pretty much the entire time, and whether that leads to a submission victory for Mix or a dominant grappling victory for Mix, I really expect Mix to just put it on the youngster here and get the win. So I like Mix. I like Mix by decision, and I think this minus 250 line is honestly a gift. I think he's going to look much better than that line indicates. So I wouldn't be surprised if that takes some steam over the next couple days and gets higher, but at minus 250, I'd be happy to eat that chalk straight up. All right, next up in the women's bantamweight division, we got Macy Chiasson coming in at minus 200, going up against Yana Santos, who comes in at plus 170. Now, Chiasson had her 2-fight winning streak snap last time around, as she was unable to deal with the physicality of Ketlen Vieira. Now, that's kind of unfortunate, considering Chiasson is usually the one that's very physical in her fights and utilizes her grappling effectively to really wear opponents down and land big shots from that top position. She also has a crafty submission game when she can find that front choke series. But against Vieira, she couldn't really get much going. Vieira was able to stop her takedowns, and then it was clear that Vieira was a superior striker as well, which caused Chiasson a lot of problems in terms of getting to her own game. In the second round, we saw Chiasson be a little bit more determined with looking for the takedown, but we saw Vieira reverse that takedown attempt and actually be the one grinding out that top position in the final 2 rounds, which again is kind of a reverse from what we normally see from Chiasson. But it's starting to become clear. When she can't get to her physicality or her grappling, she really starts to struggle in the striking realm, where opponents often have a better technical striking than her. And then she just, makes poor decisions in terms of bad takedown attempts and really unable to secure that top position. But when she can secure that top position, that's where we see her have a lot of success holding women down, battering them from that top position, and threatening with submissions. Now she's going up against veteran Yana Santos, who is now 2-0, or at least on a 2-fight winning streak as of late. Most recently, shutting down the grappling game of Miesha Tate and battering her through the first 10 minutes of that fight, and then winning that fight on the scorecards. Both of her fights against Miesha Tate and Chelsea Chandler went very similarly. She shucked off a lot of takedowns, utilized a sticking and moving game plan with her striking, and then in the third round, she was eventually taken down. But it almost seems like she's fine with being taken down in the final round because she trusts her submission defense enough that she won't get finished, and she knows she already banked the first 2 rounds enough that she could still go out there and get the decision victory should the fight end up hitting the scorecards. At her best, I think it is that sticking and moving, striking style of just utilizing her range, utilizing her reach, touching up her opponents from distance, continuously pivoting, staying in perpetual motion, and really bloodying up the nose of her opponents. She's very strong in the clinch as well, if that's the way that she looks to attack her opponents. She utilizes good knees up the middle. She even implements some shoulder strikes at times as well. She is a true veteran with 24 fights under her belt. Now, this is a tough one to call, right? You got Chiasson, who is obviously going to be looking to take Santos down, but Santos has shown good takedown defense in recent fights against women that are often quite physical. The difference is Chiasson is quite strong and probably stronger than those last two women that Santos went up against, but I did like the technical things that we saw from Santos with her takedown defense. She was able to pummel, get underhooks, quickly pivot off the cage so she doesn't give her opponents many opportunities to reshoot or chain takedown attempts together. And then from there, she just gets back to the center of the cage and starts popping off with that jab and popping off with that 1-2. And I think that's where Chiasson could end up having some trouble. I know Chiasson's taller and longer here, but I think Santos has that comfortability in the striking realm that Chiasson does not. So at plus 170, I'm kind of convinced that taking a shot on Santos could end up being the right move here. Technically speaking, Santos is the superior fighter here. It's all about maintaining that range, shucking off the eventual takedowns that are going to be coming in those first two rounds. And if she can do what she did in the Tate and Chandler fights, this is a very winnable fight for her as well. So with mediocre confidence here, I'm going to go Santos. I'm going to go Santos by decision. And I'm really hoping that she can continue to showcase that takedown defense that we've seen from her. All right. Next up in the men's featherweight division, we got Daniel Santos coming in at minus 140, going up against Ju Sang Yu, who comes in at plus 120. Now, Daniel Santos is on a 3-fight winning streak, but had a very mature and impressive performance last time around against the Korean Tiger, Jung Young Lee. That night, we saw Santos utilize his actually a little bit more of a muzzled striking approach than we're used to seeing from him, but also the ability to engage in the clinch and shoot good takedowns and get that top control where he was able to keep Lee on his back easier and easier as that fight went into deep water. Again, normally we see Santos on the gas, utilizing that classic shoot to box Diego Lima aggression that, that's made Charles Oliveira so successful in his career. Santos was, showcasing similar things there. He had a bit of a layoff between his last two fights, but he is looking to get back into the cage pretty quickly here. He was scheduled to face the Korean Superboy, Doo-ho Choi, but Choi unfortunately forced to pull out due to an injury. But he is still fighting another Korean here in the form of Ju Sang Yu, who made an absolute statement in his UFC debut by knocking out Jekka Sergi in 28 seconds. Not only did he knock him out, he put him out clean. It was one of the nastiest knockouts that we've seen from a debutant, and that only added to the record, the undefeated record of Ju Sang Yu, who is now 9-0. He's 31 years old, clearly has some very clean and crisp boxing, but he's also shown off a good grappling game in the past, specifically when he was able to grind out Ronaldo X in just a couple fights back. It was his fight before that UFC win where he earned his contract to the UFC through the Looking for a Fight show, where he was fighting in front of Dana at a Korean zombie show, and he knocked out a former Road to UFC participant. I can't recall the guy's name, Kawana. I don't want to, stereotype his first name at all here, but his last name was Kawana, and Yu was able to knock him out in just about, I think it was like 75 seconds or something like that. This is a tough one to call, but I like the plus money on you here. Like, I know Santos has really evolved his game, but I think you will be prepared for that. And I think we'll see good enough takedown defense from you. And I think we'll see cleaner striking from you. And I think that will eventually lead to him just battering and really just landing those big shots here against Santos in between those moments that he's shucking off the takedowns. I think at a certain point, Santos is just going to accept that he might not be able to get you down, and then from there, he'll start to let go with his own offense. But even then, I think he's a little bit too aggressive and too reckless for what type of striking we're going to see from the U side of things here. So I'm going to go you. Santos, tough to put away, so I'm going to put you by decision. I think we'll see him mix it up well enough with his counter-striking, maybe even some offensive grappling of his own, but I think that you could be in the driver's seat for most of this matchup and win it on the scorecards. Next up, we got a bantamweight matchup here between Chris Gutierrez, who comes in at plus 330, taking on Farid Basharat, who comes in at minus 400. Starting off on the Gutierrez side of things, he is on a 2-fight winning streak, most recently picking up a decision victory over John Castaneda, a fight that I was surprised that Gutierrez was such a, he was only minus 125, minus 130 if I'm not mistaken. I was surprised about it pre-fight, but post-fight, he really got bailed out by that knockdown that he had at the ending of the first round. Up until that point, he was getting controlled by Castaneda, who landed a takedown. Castaneda eventually got back to that success in the third round, but could not find any of that success in I meant to say Castaneda found that success in the second round, but he couldn't find that success in the third round as Gutierrez got back to his striking, his calf kicking, and eventually winning that fight on the scorecards. Gutierrez, solid fighter. It's really been his kicking game, specifically his calf kicking game, that has caused a lot of issues to his opponents in the past. And from there, he often feints the calf kick and then starts to let go with his combinations with his hands. But in recent fights, we've been seeing that his takedown defense, better yet, his lack of get-ups has been the big kryptonite in his game, and that's where opponents that are strong enough should be able to take him and eventually keep him in those bad positions. On the feet, we know what he does best. Kicks, combinations, movement, range management, but it's that takedown defense that has kind of halted that momentum that he had going into the Pedro Munoz fight. Now, he's going up against an undefeated 13-0 Farid Basharat, who was able to defeat his last opponent, Victor Hugo, or I believe it was Victor Hugo, who came in massively overweight. Basharat still accepted the fight. The fight ended up playing out slightly closer than the odds had indicated, but Basharat still ended up getting his hand raised. When I first came across him when he came into the UFC or even onto the Contender series, he was a guy that utilized a lot of striking, patient striking, methodical striking. He loved that pull counter, pulling his opponents into the pocket and then countering them effectively. But he's really leaned on his grappling as of late, specifically when he took out Taylor Lapilus, out grinding him, showcasing good takedowns, good control, and great cardio to be able to do it for 15 minutes as well. Him and his brother Javid originally, I believe, started training in London at London Shoot Fighters, I believe the gym was. Then they moved stateside when they got their Contender Series opportunities. They started training at Extreme Couture alongside Jake Shields. And then it seems in recent years, they've actually moved down to American Top Team and have set up shop over there, which I think is going to be great for the 28-year-old. Stylistically speaking, I think this is a horrible matchup for Chris Gutierrez. I think we'll see Basharat continuously land the takedowns, keep Gutierrez on his back. I think he'll be able to mat return him quite easily. And even in the striking realm, I think Basharat has the fight IQ and striking defense to really cause Gutierrez issues in terms of not being able to be effective with his kicking game. I think he'll check the calf kicks, and I think from there we'll see him continuously land those takedowns and keep Gutierrez on the defensive. So, I'd kind of be surprised if Basharat pulls off the finish here. I'm thinking more so Basharat by decision. Submission kind of tickles my fancy a little bit, but I think it'll be Basharat by decision when it's all said and done. Next up in the middleweight division, we got Edmund Shahbazyan coming in at minus 275, taking on Andre Muniz, who comes in at plus 235. Starting off on the Shahbazyan side of things, he is on a 2-fight winning streak, but I thought we saw the most mature and educated performance from Shahbazyan last time around as he picked apart Andre Petroski en route to a decision victory. Now, going into that fight, he was coming off of a first-round knockout of Dylan Budka, but also looking to erase the memory of that loss that he suffered at Gerald Mearshart. After hurting him and nearly putting Mearshart away, we saw Shahbazyan gas as he normally does and eventually gets submitted by the veteran. And that's kind of been the case with Shahbazyan throughout his career, is that if he can't get that early finish, he kind of just pushes the gas a little bit too much early, and then he starts to fall off and eventually gets finished by his opponents in the second or third rounds or ends up losing on the scorecards. But in that Petroski fight, we saw a very educated striking performance from him as he put Petroski on his back foot, managed the distance very well, really nullified the amount of takedowns that Petroski could try to shoot for. And then anytime Petroski entered that no man's land, we saw Shahbazyan ding him up with a combination. But he didn't put everything on those strikes. We just saw Petroski last week get put out by Cam Roston, who's not that big of a power puncher, and that kind of goes to show what Shahbazyan was doing in his fight with Petroski. He wanted to be mature. He wanted to put together a educated performance where he's just utilizing his striking, his range management, and really managing his gas tank so he doesn't have another cardio dump and then end up falling victim to another late round finish or being finished that way. Big power in his hands when he really wants to throw. He doesn't have that bad of a grappling game when he wants to lean on it as well. But for him, at 27 years old, accruing the amount of experience that he's already accrued, it's all about managing the gas, continuing to get that experience, and being able to just put together a good enough body of work to be competitive in the second and third rounds. Now he goes up against Andre Muniz, who's coming off of a knockout loss at the hands of Ikram Aliaskarov from earlier this year, and that was his first fight back in over a year and a half. Muniz was coming off of a split decision victory over Jun Young Park, which I think a lot of people would agree that was a bit of a robbery there on Muniz's side, but he gets the victory and then ultimately gets knocked out by Aliaskarov. Muniz is a very aggressive BJJ specialist who does a mediocre job of trying to crash the pocket with reckless striking and then changing levels and dragging opponents to the ground. And then from there, he usually has good submissions, good back control, good control period. But it's really just getting fights to the ground. It's funny that he has a TKO loss at the hands of Paul Craig, who is a guy that, has the same issues that Muniz often has when he's fighting higher levels of competition. It's getting those guys to the ground. If you can't get them to the ground, he doesn't have much to offer on the feet outside of a lot of kicks from long range, reckless entries into the pocket with big winging hooks, which is, where opponents, even guys like Ikram Aliaskarov, can kind of counter him and get the better of him there. There was a certain point in time where Muniz had a lot of hype, especially after he finished Jacare Souza the way that he did. But I think that, his last couple fights now, his last 5, he's 2-3. People are seeing that hype is starting to fizzle out a little bit and that he's not as good as people are making him out to be. Now, I think Shahbazyan wins this fight. I think that we'll see Shahbazyan eventually land that knockout here against Muniz, but we have to be careful in terms of really trusting him to go out there and actually throwing with enough heat to try to find that knockout against Muniz. We know Muniz is going to push it. We know he's going to force Shahbazyan to fight. So if Shahbazyan can't get that early finish here, maybe Muniz starts to take over. Maybe Muniz is fine with eating some of these shots that Shahbazyan ends up throwing at him and still trying to crash the pocket, engage in the clinch, and wear Shahbazyan down. So it's hard for me to trust Shahbazyan at chalk. If he was closer to maybe minus 140, minus 150, I'd be okay with taking a shot on him there. But at minus 275, it's hard to count out Muniz's chance in terms of making this a chaotic fight, which is something that Shahbazyan often does not do all that well in. So the prediction will still be Shahbazyan and Shahbazyan by knockout. I'm assuming the over-under is probably set at 1.5, so it's probably, not bettable there. You know what? Instead of just saying, I think, how about I just quickly just jump on BetOnline and check right now as well in terms of what that line is looking like. If it's 2.5, I wouldn't mind taking a shot on the under 2.5 at a decent enough line, but I just feel like it will be 1.5. Yeah, 1.5. Under 1.5, minus 130. So maybe that might not be a bad shot either, considering the aggressive nature that Muniz normally fights with. That could either put him in trouble or he's able to just get to Shahbazyan and eventually find that finish. So I'd be more comfortable with 2.5. I'm assuming let's see what the fight doesn't go to decision is on BetOnline. Minus 400 on the fight doesn't go to decision. So an alternate under 2.5, probably minus 300, minus 350. I don't know. I'll have to consider it, but I feel like this could be chaotic quickly. But I think it'll be the power of Shahbazyan that comes through and earns him the knockout victory. All right, that brings us to our first fight on the main card here, and it goes down in the middleweight division as we have Abus Magomedov coming in at plus 205, going up against Joe Pyfer, who comes in at minus 240. Now, Magomedov is on a 3-fight winning streak now after stumbling in back-to-back fights against Sean Strickland, who would eventually go on to win a title, and Kyle Bahayo, who put on a good performance over the course of 15 minutes to get that win over Magomedov. But coming into the UFC, we had mainly seen Magomedov utilize his striking, his power striking, that obviously helped him get that quick knockout victory over Dustin Stoltzfus in his UFC debut. But then it didn't work out against Sean Strickland, and then we saw him slow down in that second round and end up losing there. But he's managed his gas tank a lot better in this current winning streak. We saw him grind out Warlley Alves. We saw him actually battle back from adversity in that second round against Bruno Ferreira to eventually submit him in the third round of that fight. That was very good to see for the 35-year-old. And then last time around, we got one of the most bizarre performances from Michel Pereira that we'd ever seen. And Magomedov was able to capitalize on it, take advantage of it, and really just outpointed Pereira en route to a decision victory there. So again, a bit of an asterisk behind that last fight for Magomedov, but I think it still goes to show that Magomedov is really rounding out his game, even at 35 fights into his career. He's powerful with his striking, as we know. We know he has a reliable grappling game if he needs to lean on it. It's just that gas tank that I have a little bit of a question mark about. Now, he's going up against Joe Pyfer, who has successfully bounced back from his lone UFC loss at the hands of Jack Hermansson, and he's pulled off 2 straight victories now, first knocking out Marc-Andre Barriault, and then last time around really taking it to Kelvin Gastelum and winning that fight on the scorecards. He hurt Gastelum a few times early in that fight, and Gastelum managed to rally back in that third round and have some solid success of his own, which kind of goes to show that Pyfer also, similar to Magomedov, kind of struggles in deep water at times. But Pyfer is a guy earlier in his career who would utilize his wrestling to really wear his opponents down and utilize his submission game, and then he started to lean more so on his power, which has obviously presented the amount of knockouts that we've been seeing from him. The last time we really saw him determined to utilize his grappling was against Abdul Razak Al Hassan, who he eventually, I believe, submitted in the second round of their fight, showcasing that he wanted to stay away from the big power of Al Hassan. I still have my question marks about Pyfer. People continuously bet him at chalk, and I'm not really behind it. I think that this is a guy that's been getting away with his power for a long time. I thought Gastelum was going to be the one to kind of trump him there once again. I did cash against him with Hermansson. I'm happy about that, but I know there is another loss coming in Pyfer's career. And I kind of feel it could be this weekend against Magomedov. If Magomedov's chin holds up, if you guys remember, his loss to Sean Strickland was more so a barrage of strikes and exhaustion that eventually got Magomedov out of there. But prior to that, it's been a long time since Magomedov has been put out clean. So maybe his durability not all that bad nowadays. But if he can handle the early power of Pyfer here, I think Magomedov is the better overall fighter. I think he can match the strikes of Pyfer. I think he can get this fight to the ground if he needs to. I think he can shut down the grappling game, or at least the submission game of Pyfer. This will definitely be way more competitive than the odds are actually indicating here. So I like me some Magomedov at plus 205. Yes, please. Again, better all around, and if his durability holds up, he will make this a very tough fight for Joe Pyfer. And again, he's longer than him, same height as him, so it's not like Pyfer is going to be towering over him like he was against Kelvin Gastelum. So give me some Abus Magomedov here, and I think he wins this fight by decision. All right, next up, in the featherweight division, we got Josh Emmett coming in at plus 355, going up against Youssef Zalal, who comes in at minus 455. Starting off on the Emmett side of things, he lost a unanimous decision to Lerone Murphy earlier this year, I believe it was. Very tough loss for him there. There were some close-ish rounds, but I think by when it was all said and done, it was pretty clear that Lerone Murphy had done enough to get his hand raised there. Emmett is a guy that's largely relied on his power striking approach to try to get his wins, whether it's knocking fools clean out like he did against Bryce Mitchell, or landing, or optically speaking, looking like he's landing harder than Calvin Kattar and winning that decision. If I remember correctly, there was a lot of, maybe not a lot of controversy, but there was some argument in terms of who deserved to win the fight that night. But, coming up short against the Yair Rodriguez's, the Ilia Toporia's, the Lerone Murphys, we know that Emmett's probably not going to get anywhere close to a title shot or title contention, especially with him being 40 years old now. But, as we all know, the last thing to go for a lot of these fighters is their power. And I wouldn't be surprised if Emmett, is able to just pull out a victory here and there at this stage of his career by landing that big shot to put guys away. But he's going to struggle to do that here against Youssef Zalal, who utilizes a very safe striking game like he did against Calvin Kattar last time around. It was a very boring performance from Youssef Zalal, who just treaded the cage and really just touched up Calvin Kattar from distance. Prior to that, it was his return to the UFC where he won 3 straight fights, submitted all 3 of his opponents, looked really good, very improved from the 3-3-1 run that he had in his first UFC stint. which ended in 2022. He got back to work right away, picked up 3 first-round finishes on the regional scene, and then a year and a half later, he was brought back into the UFC and ended up submitting Billy Quarantillo. So, he has improved his grappling game immensely. Prior to this second stint in the UFC, he had largely been known for a guy to just utilize his Muay Thai and his striking to just edge out some of these very close fights. But outside of the Calvin Kattar fight, he's been putting on some statements, and this is a fight that he should try to put another statement on to remind people that, he's still good. He's not a guy that had that boring fight against Kattar. He is still very capable of having dominant performances. I don't see him out wrestling Emmett. I think it's going to have to come from counter-striking Emmett's power punches, and I think from there he could either find a club and sub opportunity, or if he just decides to stay safe enough, he just picks apart Emmett, counters those big shots, stays treading at distance, and wins this fight on the scorecards. I think Zalal wins, but minus 455, I'm probably going to think twice about parlaying that. But again, Zalal probably wins this fight. Our next up, light heavyweights, and either guy could easily be a replacement should anything happen to either guy fighting in the main event for the title. But here we got Yuri Prochazka coming in at minus 180, going up against Khalil Rountree Jr., who comes in at plus 155. Starting off on the Prochazka side of things, he was able to get back on the winning track earlier this year when he knocked out Jamal Hill in the third round of their fight. Prochazka had hurt Jamal Hill early in that first round, then actually got hurt himself in that second round, but managed to rally back in the third and finally get the finish over the former champion. We know what Prochazka is all about. 37 fights into his professional career. This guy embodies the samurai warrior spirit as much as anybody on the roster, and he brings that violent nature to his fights. That's obviously left him open for precision strikers like Alex Pereira to counter him and eventually put him away in those fights. But still, he's able to go out there and break some of these guys like he did against Glover Teixeira, Alexander Rakic, even Jamal Hill, and then eventually find late finishes over those guys too. His defensive grappling is slowly improving, but it's really his chaotic striking game that allows him to take command in a lot of his fights and get the respect of his opponents. Now, I quickly want to touch on his last loss to Alex Pereira. If you guys remember, that was UFC 313, which was originally scheduled to be a fight between Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. Unfortunately, I believe it was Conor that pulled out due to a pinky toe injury, and the UFC was looking for something big to replace them with, and they called upon Alex Pereira and Yuri Prochazka to make quick turnarounds, or at least a quick turnaround. Both of those, because I believe it was, I think it was UFC 313, or was it UFC 303? I'm kind of confusing myself right now. I believe it was UFC 303 because I remember it was after, it was UFC 303 was their second fight because UFC 300, we saw Prochazka defeat Alexander Rakic and we saw Pereira knock out Jamal Hill. And it was quick. From what I had heard, Prochazka did not want to take the fight because it was too quick. He wanted a little bit more of a layoff. He wanted to prepare for it more. But then apparently the UFC threw him a bag that he could not refuse. And he ultimately ended up paying for it by getting knocked out once again by Pereira in the second round of that matchup. Prochazka's fun, but you have to wonder what the state of his chin is like, especially with how wild and chaotic he normally fights. He's going up against Khalil Rountree Jr., who I was dead wrong about last time around when he went up against Jamal Hill and ended up butchering him over 25 minutes and winning that fight on the scorecards. I thought the reason Khalil was an favorite in that matchup was because of the strong first 3 rounds he had against Alex Pereira last year when he challenged him for the title. And I thought maybe it was just a stylistic thing for Rountree to have success in that fight, and I thought Hill would be able to pick Rountree apart a little bit more, but Rountree stayed on that calf kick and stayed with his Muay Thai combinations, and he really just put an absolute beat down on the former champion there. And Rountree, 35 years old, probably in the best form of his career. Confidence sky high, which I believe a lot of that comes from the performance that he had against Alex Pereira, but also, we saw that bear its fruit in that Jamal Hill fight with the way that he was controlling it. Again, kicks, punches, cutting off the cage, managing the range as well, counter-striking. It all looked very, very high level. And I think he's just at a sky-high confidence at this point in his career. This is a spectacular fight with him and Prochazka likely determining who could be the next to challenge for the light heavyweight title. And I have to lean ever so slightly to the Rountree side of things here. With him being so defensively responsible nowadays, and him obviously being able to counter Prochazka here, probably having the speed advantage too, I can see him catching Prochazka with a counter and eventually putting him away. I think Rountree has that power to really take advantage of the shaky durability of Prochazka at times. Prochazka could obviously surprise people here with obviously the power that he presents, and maybe he just doesn't show enough respect to Rountree and just kind of walks through him. But if Rountree, continues to keep that belief in himself high, if he counters effectively, if he keeps that high, tight guard, I think he's going to cause Prochazka trouble here. And I think it will ultimately be a counter from Rountree that puts Prochazka out here. So plus 155, very good number on a guy that I think is technically superior and has the power to take advantage of some of the shortcomings in Prochazka's game. So I'm going to go Rountree Jr. and Rountree Jr. by knockout. All right, that brings us to the Bantamweight Championship co-main event, as champion Merab Dvalishvili comes in at minus 355, taking on Corey Sandhagen, who comes in at plus 290. Now, Dvalishvili is looking to defend his title for the third time this year after successfully defending it in January against Umar Nurmagomedov, where he came in as a plus 250 underdog. And I was one of those schmucks that ended up parlaying against him there. I know I picked against him. I don't know if I parlayed against him, but I really thought he was going to struggle with the overall game of Nurmagomedov, and it seemed to be looking that way for the first two rounds. But Dvalishvili really dug into his championship demeanor in the championship rounds and that third round, and that was enough for him to really overwhelm Nurmagomedov, keep up that high pressure, keep up that high pace, and really keep Nurmagomedov in defensive positions, allowing Dvalishvili to win that fight on the scorecards. Then he put on a great performance against Sugar Sean O'Malley, where it seemed like he wasn't as scared of the power that was coming back his way compared to the first time they fought last year when he had defeated O'Malley for the title. This time around, he utilized his striking, he landed some big shots, but ultimately it was his grappling that saw him get that north-south choke against Sean O'Malley and force the tap, I believe in the third or fourth round of that fight. That just continues to show the evolutions of Dvalishvili's game. He is a guy that was largely a decision-heavy fighter. 13 of his UFC wins, 11 of them coming by decision. And then he earned his second win by finish last time around against Sean O'Malley. And according to his coaches, he is a guy that is looking to be more aggressive with his grappling, more aggressive with his submission game. And that's going to be very tough for a lot of fighters to overcome, because this guy is a non-stop gas tank, a guy that just never takes his foot off the gas, and a guy that never seems to gas. He's jumping around in between rounds. He's just waiting for the round to start again. At the end of 25 minutes, he could go out there and run a marathon if he could. We've never seen anything like his gas tank before, and I think that allows him to really put a pace and pressure on opponents that guys are really not looking forward to. People say that his control once he gets takedowns is not that great, but he doesn't care, because if you guys have been watching MMA for as long as I have, and you remember Cain Velasquez, one of the best heavyweight champions of all time, that guy utilized a similar style to Dvalishvili in the fact that he would just land consecutive takedowns, and he wouldn't mind if you work back to your feet, because he knows he could just slam you back to the ground and just make you expend more energy in terms of working back to your feet rather than just trying to rest and get some time on your back. And that's what Dvalishvili is so good at. That's why you see him attempting 20 plus takedowns per fight. It's crazy what this guy's capable of. It's a shame he's 34, so I'm sure, within the next 2, maybe 3 years, we'll see him start to decline. I wish he was, in his early 30s, like 30, 29, 30, 31, so we could get some more years out of him. But 34 years old, usually the age that we see these guys at the high level in the lower weight classes start to slow down. But luckily for him, I think he has a good enough matchup here against Corey Sandhagen that he could possibly defend that title for the third time. I was going up against Sandhagen, who had that loss against Umar Nurmagomedov last year, but managed to bounce back early this year when he was able to get that solid win over Davison Figueiredo. Now, the result reads knee injury for Figueiredo, but you have to give credit to Sandhagen and his unorthodox BJJ to set up that weird finish that caused Figueiredo to injure himself, and then from there Sandhagen was able to get the win. Normally very unorthodox, utilizes a lot of stance switches, a lot of flashy kicks, a lot of flashy strikes. Even his grappling is flashy with how he likes to twist and twist guys up into pretzels and just put them in very uncomfortable positions. He has strong wrestling as well when he has a good enough advantage over his opponents, just as we saw when he beat Rob Font. He's a very solid fighter. He's a very, a very experienced fighter as well. All of his losses in the UFC have only come against guys that are either champions, eventual champions, or guys that challenge for titles, showcasing how high level he is. So, very impressive that he's managed to work his way back to a title shot here, even though it's only coming off of one win. He did release that call that he had with Hunter Campbell, where Hunter's like, hey, you've done a lot for us, and now that we have an opportunity for you to fight for the title, we're going to give it to you. But unfortunately, he's going up against the best bantamweight right now, and Dvalishvili style I just think is going to be too hard for Sandhagen to contain. Sandhagen might be able to catch Dvalishvili with something crazy that Dvalishvili is not expecting, but from all accounts, Dvalishvili's chin is ironclad. You're not going to put this guy out unless you're Ricky Simon and you get that last-minute submission attempt. So I think it's going to be very hard for Sandhagen to have much success with finding a finish in this matchup. So I'm going to go Dvalishvili. Dvalishvili probably by decision. I'd be interested to see if he actually tries to take a little bit more risk and look for submissions here. Obviously, we saw Sandhagen get submitted by Dvalishvili's closest training partner, Aljamain Sterling. But I think it'll more so be a decision here with Dvalishvili just constantly controlling the distance, controlling the pace, keeping Sandhagen moving backwards, and keeping him eating shots here. So, and still bantamweight champion Merab Dvalishvili. All right. That brings us to our light heavyweight title headliner here as Magomed Ankalaev comes in at -270 looking to defend his title for the first time against the man that he wanted from earlier this year, Alex Poatan Pereira, who comes in at +230. Now, I might have been the happiest person on the planet when Ankalaev got his hand raised over Pereira earlier this year, and he looked damn good doing it. It was a bit of a close fight, but I thought it was clear that Ankalaev did enough to at least win 3 of those rounds. He was the one that ended up landing the biggest shot of the fight to hurt Pereira compared to it being the other way around, which a lot of people expected it to be. Credit to Pereira for stuffing all 12 takedown attempts from Magomed Ankalaev. But again, showing the well-roundedness of Ankalaev's game, we saw him still stick to his striking, and that was still enough for him to go out there and outpoint Pereira. Ankalaev is one of the probably the most well-rounded Dagestani fighter that we've ever seen in the UFC, because he is just as comfortable in the striking realm as he is in the grappling realm. So if one of those sides of the coin is not working, he can just go to the other side and still find success. I'd like to see him maybe be a little bit more aggressive at times, but that's probably what's made him so special. One thing I love about his striking game, which I picked up earlier on in his career, he's comfortable fighting from either stance. And he loves to give that mirror stance to his opponent as well. So if his opponent is fighting him southpaw, he's going to fight them orthodox. If his opponent's fighting orthodox, he's going to fight southpaw. He just always wants to have that advantage because he has a good kicking game with his power, with either leg, honestly, and he produces decent power from either side of his body. So very, very good fighter, very good all around. And I kind of predicted it. I knew, I obviously let it go very big on Ankalaev as a small underdog in the first fight, and I knew had he gotten his hand raised, he'd be a big favorite in their rematch, and here he is at -270. Now let's talk about Alex Poatan Pereira, who is probably the biggest star that the UFC has now after the Sean O'Malley experiment kind of failed. Conor McGregor obviously always hinting at fighting but never fighting. But Pereira, a non-English speaking fighter that literally just says Chama and goes out, or Shama, I should say, and goes out there and knocks fools out. That was enough for him to be one of the most popular fighters, if not the most popular fighter currently on the UFC roster. And the UFC needed him. They needed a guy to go out there and be exciting and really take that mantle for the UFC and sell some pay-per-views. So obviously, pay-per-view model dying now. That's obviously going to be out of play next year. So I don't think they're as worried about that. But we know what Pereira brings to the table: kickboxing background, nasty power in that lead left hook that he has. Very impressive, improved takedown defense, as we saw obviously in his last fight against Ankalaev. But, one thing that you have to kind of like look into is the fact that ever since Pereira came into the UFC has kind of been just feeding him strikers. The only non-striker that he fought was Jan Blachowicz, who ended up losing a split decision that night, and Blachowicz really had to work for it. We saw him huffing and puffing after that final bell rang, and that just goes to show that Pereira is clearly working on that aspect of his game to try to keep fights in the upright position. But, he's had other strikers he could go against, and he pulled it out against every single one of them, knocking them out pretty much all the time. Obviously, Adesanya got that knockout victory over Pereira, so there's that too. But he's still one of the best fighters in the promotion, strictly with his striking alone. Produces insane power with his calf kicks and his punches. It'd be bittersweet if he won again, at least from my perspective, because I'm a big Ankalaev, fan. He's a guy that I've been talking about for a long time. I've always called him the best, the most well-rounded light heavyweight ever since John Jones retired. Now, let's see how this fight goes down. What I'm thinking is, now that Pereira has already spent 25 minutes in the cage with Ankalaev, he kind of knows what to expect. Kind of knows the strength of Ankalaev, the entries he'll have, some of his striking. And I think we'll see Pereira try to let it go a little bit more now. Something of note, in the 2 rematches that Pereira has already had in the UFC, the second fight has always finished quicker than the first. And I think a lot of that has to do with him being a little bit more aggressive. Like his fight against Israel Adesanya. We saw him open up a little bit more, and that ultimately led to him getting knocked out. The fight against Yuri Prochazka, we saw him a little bit more active early, hurt Prochazka at the end of the first round, and then finished him early in that second round. I could see him being a little bit more willing to take chances here against Ankalaev, especially after he had defended as many takedowns as he did in their first matchup. But I still think Ankalaev will end up getting the better of him. I think we'll see Ankalaev actually land a few takedowns in this matchup because of the aggressiveness of Pereira. I think we'll see if Pereira does start to open up a little bit, Ankalaev has a good counter-striking game that he might be able to land on that chin of Pereira. The other aspect that a lot of people might be overlooking here is that Pereira is 38 years old. He's getting up there in age. Ankalaev's still only 33, clearly in the prime of his career. And I know the higher up in weight class you go, the further out you can kind of give some of these guys grace with their age. But you can't overlook that 38-year-old mark, right? This could be competitive than the odds indicate, so it's going to be tough to muster up that confidence to parlay Ankalaev at minus 270. I think throughout fight week, we're actually going to see Pereira take some action here. I wouldn't be surprised if Ankalaev closed down around that minus 200, maybe minus 185 range. I'd be more comfortable taking a shot on him there. But currently at minus 270, I think it plays out closer than that. We'll see a little bit more of a dangerous version of Pereira that could either benefit him where he ends up landing that knockout and getting the finish, or he ends up getting taken down, he ends up getting countered, he ends up getting put out himself. Any of those things are a possibility. I'm going to go with Ankalaev eventually finding that knockout here against Pereira. The under 3.5 has my attention at plus money because I believe, like I said, Pereira might be a little bit more aggressive, and that could lead to a finish from either guy. So that's where I might end up having my action. But I like Ankalaev here, and I think he wins by knockout. And still, light heavyweight champion, Magomed Ankalaev. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC 320. Again, all my content is kind of moving back a day. I'll have multiple videos coming out throughout the next couple days. PFL should drop either Wednesday night or Thursday afternoon. Then we'll have Cage Warriors dropping for you guys on Friday. The written breakdowns for OKTAGON should be up on Friday as well. I got a ton of content dropping. Make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys again tomorrow for the... I'll probably drop the top 3 lock of the night candidates and chalk or not. And hopefully the PFL breakdowns for you guys as well. See you guys then. Peace.
Last thing.